Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second and final session of the first installment of the Met Opera's HD Live in Schools Opera Book Club for the 2023-24 season. My name is Rinehart, and I'm the content manager for education at the Met Opera. And we are so excited, thrilled, humbled to welcome the one and only Sister Helen Prejean and to be joined by students and teachers from HD Live in Schools districts across the country. Sister Helen, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be a part of this. I loved meeting with the teachers. If the kids are halfway as good, I'm ready.
I'm sure they are, at least halfway, right?
Yeah, at least halfway.
So Sister Helen Prejean is known around the world for her tireless activism against the death penalty. She has been instrumental in sparking national dialogue about capital punishment and in shaping the Catholic Church's vigorous opposition to all executions. In 1993, she published Dead Man Walking, which we're here to talk about today, hitting the shelves when national support for the death penalty was over 80%, and in her native Louisiana, closer to 90%. The book ignited a national debate about capital punishment and inspired an Academy Award-winning movie, a play, and of course an opera, which students all saw this past weekend in movie theaters. Sister Helen continues her work today, dividing her time between educating the public, campaigning against the death penalty, counseling individual death row prisoners, and working with murder victims' family members. Her second book, The Death of Innocence, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions, was published in 2004. And her third book, River of Fire, My Spiritual Journey, was published in 2019. So just as a way of getting into Dead Man Walking, we just noted that when the book was published in the early 1990s, support for the death penalty was extremely high, both nationally and in your home state of Louisiana. That's, in my estimation, quite different from today, and might be quite different for the students across the country who were born in the 21st century. Over the past 25 years, new death sentences have declined by over 80%, and executions have fallen by 75%. And while 60% of Americans currently prefer life imprisonment without the possibility of parole to death penalty, in 2019, the U.S. federal government began imposing death penalties again after a 16-year hiatus. So I'm wondering if you can sort of set the scene for us and give us a sense of what the national conversation was like when you were writing, first when you were working with Pat Senier, when you were writing Dead Man Walking, and how is that different or maybe similar to the current sort of political situation?
Right. Well, the way it's changed is because of the experience of trying to make the death penalty work. The theory of it was in the Supreme Court, when they put the death penalty back in the modern era, said, look, it's only going to be reserved for the worst of the worst murders. And we'll leave it up to prosecutors to decide when it's pursued or not. And we'll give, two separate trials, one to see if you're guilty or not. Then if you're guilty, you have a whole separate trial and look at all the mitigating circumstances of your life, see if you should be killed. That is the blooming theory of the death. Then experience has happened. We now have 195 human beings in this system that were lucky enough to prove that they were condemned to death wrongly with that system. So you have a growing consciousness, but we have pockets of death. In fact, here in Louisiana, we have a big pocket of death about to happen because we have a governor who was just elected, who's tired that we haven't had enough executions. So his political campaign that he gives to get his constituents is, we're going to have more executions in Louisiana. If we have trouble getting the lethal injection drugs, we're going to bring back firing squads, the electric chair, hang people. He is a death proponent for Louisiana, and he has the power to start putting it into place. So while you have this national thing and generally people getting it, the pockets of resistance where you have prosecutors and people in power are in, get this now, what's the pattern? Former slave states, where most of the executions have happened anyway. And here's a question for the students. Why is this pattern so pronounced that most of the executions happen in the states that used to practice slavery? What's the connection?
Yeah, I think it's really important to note, as you just did, that there is no real national policy on the death penalty. It's a state by state, it's a federal situation. So although there's a sort of, in terms of polling or public opinion, maybe public support for the death penalty isn't very high. Individual states can enact what they
want. You know why there's no national policy? Who would be the one to show there's a fundamental constitutional right not to be killed by the state? It's the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court, right.
And the Supreme Court, when they look at the 8th Amendment that says we will not practice cruel punishment, they countenance that taking a live human being, putting him in a cell for 20 years and taking him out and killing him is not a cruel act. That is their thinking. Now, how they get there, what are they doing to come to that kind of conclusion? They could have abolished the death penalty. If they could do it today, look and see at the cruelty involved in the execution of human beings. Not to mention all the mistakes in the system that we can't handle this. Nobody even knows what worst of the worst means, but they don't do it because they're ideologues and they fulfill a political position. And that's why we don't have a national policy. And then they turn it over to the states. So guess who was eager to get it? The former slave states, who have always used harsh penal sentences and the death penalty to keep things in place in the South.
Yeah, it's worth noting just for students that the Supreme Court ruled in the 1970s, I think 72, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that the death penalty itself was not unconstitutional. It was the application of the death penalty, which they found to be too random or too arbitrary, and that was a violation of the cruel and unusual punishment clause, but not the death penalty itself.
Now, that was 1972, and that was a Furman decision.
The Furman decision, right.
The Furman decision, too arbitrary and capricious in its application, said it's like being struck by lightning.
Right.
It is the very same today, but the court will not acknowledge the fundamental human right not to be tortured and killed. And so they abide by their political position. So we have to abolish the death penalty state by state. And so that's the work. That's the work.
So I want to pick up on the point you've been making about what you call pockets of death that are in largely former slave states in the U.S.
All of them, former slave states.
All of them, and try to sort of connect the dots between this conversation about the death penalty and contemporary debates about policing and prison abolition, because the current discourse, the current conversation, and this is preceding the Black Lives Matter movement, but also, of course, in its wake, has largely focused on prison abolition, mass incarceration, over-policing, mandatory minimum sentences, granting pardons or clemency to nonviolent drug offenders. And I'm sort of wondering, where does capital punishment fit into that? Because it doesn't seem to be...
It is the apex, Nick.
Yeah.
Okay, the apex is that we'll actually decide some people should die and we'll take them out and kill them. But right under that apex is harsh imprisonment. We're the highest incarcerator in the world in the United States. Harsh punishments for drug offense, nonviolent offense. So we also have that in there. And so then you have the whole over-policing. Again, that's by punishment and incarceration and policemen. It's the use of violence and force to keep social order. And where's the big fear? Where do we see over-policing? It's really tied to race. It's Black people who are stopped while driving for one traffic thing, and it leads up to all kinds of stuff. All these things are connected. And if I throw a religious thing in here too, the image of God behind all this is God is judge and punisher in chief. And when people make mistakes, when they do a wrong thing, they should be punished. And so they should be thrown away into prison for long sentences. And politicians get elected to office where they say to their constituents, I'm tough on crime. And We have this governor that ran on that platform in Louisiana right now. I just want to ask a question. Are the kids going to ask any questions?
Yes, I have some questions, but they're not live with us, but I'm going to ask them on their behalf. Yeah.
Oh, you're live.
But they can see you.
I'm live.
So let's go straight to student questions then, because they want to know about the writing of the book and how the whole process came about. So this is a question from Zoe in Silver Spring, Maryland, who wants to know, did you have any struggles while writing the book as you relived the intense parts of your interactions with Pat Sonier? So was there a struggle in writing the book as you sort of went?
I got it. Yeah, Zoe, I found out after I had the experience of writing this book, Dead Man Walking. I hope y'all they have access to this book.
We sent like 300 copies out to students across the country.
Well, look,
they all have it.
Book. Okay, I hope you get the book. Because when you're reading it, you're quiet, you're not debating with anybody, and it's going to take you there. So 2 years it took me to write the book. If I had not had this really good editor to help me, you never would have heard of this book. Mm-hmm. So I had witnessed these executions, so I'm reliving it. By writing the book and getting the word out to the people to abolish the death penalty, I think it helped me. It was a therapeutic thing for me to go through the suffering, but it was for a purpose. That now it's going to be in a book, and people are going to read the book. I didn't know they were going to make a movie of the book. I didn't know they were going to do an opera of the book. But you write a book for its truth. And so the writing of the book helped me. And let me tell you how this editor, Jason Epstein at Random House, helped me shape the narrative. When he looked at the first draft of Dead Man Walking, he said, look, it's good writing, but nobody's going to read your book. And the reason was I was so into the human rights of people being executed that he said, you wait far too long to talk about the crime. What did this man, Pat Sonier, he's the first one in the book, what did he do? You got to bring the crime. If you don't talk about the crime in the first 10 pages of this book, nobody's going to read the book because they're going to think you're overly sympathetic to the murderer, and they're not going to read it. So that's what I did. First 10 pages within Dead Man Walking. What was the crime Pat Sonier and his brother Eddie had done? It couldn't have been more terrible. Killing in cold blood a teenage couple and leaving their bodies out in a sugarcane field. That was the crime. And Jason explained to me as a writer, you got to take people there and you got to let them know you feel the outrage of the murder of those kids and the suffering of their mothers and fathers for the rest of their life, that their children went out to a football homecoming game and they never saw them alive again. And you got to bring people over to both sides. So the opera captures that. You really see the victim suffering in there. The movie, we just had a screening in Baton Rouge last night. Tim Robbins came for that, and that brings it out too. Because when you write a truthful story, a truthful book, you got to bring people over honestly to both sides of the suffering. So it's a great help to me to write the book.
Yeah, that's fascinating to know that it was an editor's comment that ultimately, as you've just suggested, finds its way into the structure of the opera and the film that both have these opening scenes, which is your opening scene. So the value of a good editor is not to be underestimated.
No, yay for editors.
Yeah. So this is a similar question from Sophia in Norfolk, Virginia, which is, did you emerge from your experience working with Pat Sonier and others at Angola already knowing that you would publish a book? And if not, what inspired you to write it and what influenced your narrative style?
Oh, wow, Sophia, that's a great question. I came out of that execution chamber after watching that first person be executed. It was the middle of the night. It was by electrocution. I came out into the parking lot of the prison, and I threw up. I had never in my life witnessed that deliberate, calculating protocol of taking a human being step by step and killing them. And I'd gotten to know him. I knew Pat for over 2.5 years. I didn't have a clue about what I was going to do. I wasn't standing there throwing up in the parking lot saying, oh, I'll write a book, and then they'll do an opera. All you're doing is throwing up in the parking lot and traumatized, okay? So then I knew something, though, and I knew that I had just witnessed something that most of society was never, ever going to say.
Yep.
It's almost like a secret ritual. There have been 2 court cases to try to make executions public, and they've both been defeated. So there I was, a witness. I had witnessed what it really meant for the state to kill people. And so when you're a witness to something, when you're a member of society awake about something and no one else is yet awake, your job, your mission, your purpose then is to get out there and tell the story. And at first what I did was just to give talks to anybody who would listen. Then gradually people were saying to me, why don't you write this up? And then that's how the concept came, I should write a book. And then the 2 years in the writing of the book. I had no idea the power that the book would unleash. When you write a book, you do it for its own sake. You do it to tell the truth. Again, that publisher at Random House, that Jason Epsteiner was my editor. It is a great gift for a writer to get your publisher behind your book. And they started getting out the book on the media to get it reviewed by really important people in the society's influencers who reviewed the book, got it out there. And then in a very short period of time, because it was a sound book, Susan Sarandon read it in '94 when the paper came out. And by the end of '95, we had the film of Dead Man Walking, which changed the way films were made about the death penalty.
And something I really appreciate about the book is that it does many things at once. It tells the story of your relationships with death row inmates, but it also gives some sort of stats and a sense of like the political discourse in the country, some more sort of sociological reflections, a lot of behind the scenes stuff about the legal process of trying to get pardons.
That's right.
So what influenced that kind of writing style, having both the personal narrative and the political context and the behind the scenes? You know, it's really multiple books in one.
Basic information.
Yeah.
The first African-American Supreme Court justice was Thurgood Marshall. And we were going by something he had said when he said, a lot of the American people say they support the death penalty. Educate them on it and how it really works, and they won't support the death penalty. So there had already been books written on the death penalty, which gave a lot of statistics and facts. But what Dead Man does is, it's this personal story, first of all, of a Catholic nun who, as Tim Robbins said, she was in over her head. And I was. I'd never been involved in criminal justice, much less being with people executed and all that. But so you do a personal story, and not just of the people being executed, but what about the guards that have to do the killing, that practice for that? What happens to them as a result? Does that affect them? What about the warden who has to nod his head? What about all the people on the pardon board that all played a part in this? You tell everybody's story in doing it, but you wanted to have facts in there. So the important thing about being a journalist is you tell facts, but you weave it into story. People read for story, but then you get those facts in there.
The point you made about being a witness to something, when you see something, you need to tell people about it. And one thing that's really powerful about the opera and the film is that the audience becomes witness to this thing that otherwise they wouldn't see. And when you're in the opera, and I had this experience on opening night, you're sitting next to these people seeing this thing happen on stage that you would never otherwise be privy to. And so it is that really powerful thing of your witnessing forces us to witness it also. And so it's
and Nick, you witness in community.
Right.
Tim Robbins says this about films and art all the time. When you're in a community, all the lights go off and you experience this together in community, because we can't operate without community, you know, and you need the solidarity of all the people around you, because you're witnessing something horrific. And the way it's done in the opera, and the way with Ivo van Hove, or is it Van Hoven?
Van Hove.
Hove, what?
Yeah, Van Hove.
Van Hove.
Yeah.
that he gets those cameras in there and you really see the insertion of that needle. And it's the only opera in the world with 1.5 minutes of silence. So you got to attend to what is going on. You hear the beating of your own heart. And then we're watching, this man's alive, and we're watching him be killed. And the way the director, Van Hove, also did it, he has on a plaid shirt. You know, he's not in prison gear. Right away, that separates you from the human race. You're a number. Here you are in your prison outfit. He's got on a plaid shirt. You see him as a human being. And very interesting set of there's no bars, there's no cells, there's no handcuffs, no shackle. It's the interaction of him with Sister Helen primarily, but other people too, and coming to grips in his own life with what he's done.
So this is another question from Delaney in Bangor, Maine. How did it feel for your book to become so successful and actually have an impact? You know, you say you write the book not because people are going to read it, but you write it for the truth of it. So what does it feel like to actually have it become a bestseller and translated into 10 languages, made into a movie?
Well, going back to that park and that dark parking lot outside the execution chamber, the whole desire of my heart was to bring people close, believing in the goodness of the American people, that if they can get close to this, they're going to know, hey, we can barely trust our government to get our taxes right or fill the potholes, and we can entrust over to them this whole thing of deciding that some of our citizens need to die. It's the way I feel about the opera. This is a question I'm asking. What is it? What do you feel like being in an opera house, man? And here comes this character called Sister Helen, and she's you. What's that like? That's the big question. And what I'm happy about is it's opening the curtain back and getting people close to this story of this thing that we have to recognize. It's the deepest human right of any human being is the right not to be killed, the right to life, inalienable, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights puts it. That's what I'm happy about. Look at the story getting out. I was blown away by the live HD, blown away by the power of that. And that so many young people are part of this. Boy, that makes me happy. It makes me so happy to be part of this with you.
So we have one more question from Mara in Fort Worth, Texas. And this is actually a video question, so I'm hoping this works.
Do your magic, Nick.
Let's see.
What is the hardest part about the work you do?
So her question is, what is the hardest part about the work that you do? And we were just talking before we went live. Sister Helen just got back from Angola, Louisiana State Penitentiary today. So this work is still ongoing. This is not just 1993. So what's the hardest part of this ongoing work that you're doing?
Well, you can't believe the suffering that goes on of people who sit in these cells condemned to death, what happens to their mothers, their families, all this untold suffering, and it's hidden from people's view. It's being exposed to suffering that is wrong, that burns the fire in my heart to work for change. And so that's the hardest thing. Here I am in Louisiana. We just elected a governor. We haven't had executions in this state in 17 years. It's all up to the powers that be to pull the strings and do it. And now we've elected this person. And the Supreme Court is allowing this. They've turned it over to the states. Go to it. They could have done a foundational principle that this is a cruel act and against human rights, and they didn't. And now in the states, we're fighting, tooth and nail, hand to hand to try to save lives.
So I remember when we saw you the other week at our educator conference in New York, you mentioned briefly that you are writing another book or planning to write another book. And I'd love to hear what that book is, how the process is going, and if you could tell us more about it and how it builds or expands upon the work you've already done.
You know, they say that writing a book is like riding a horse that constantly changes shape under you.
I can attest to that. Yes.
My horse has changed shape a couple of times.
Yeah.
Okay. And I knew that I wanted to do a story about Manuel Ortiz, an innocent man on death row in Angola. 30 years. And then this guy, Richard Glossop in Oklahoma, whose case is still unfurling. He's before the Supreme Court. And I kind of didn't have a good structure for it. I came away from the opera just seeing the power of the spiritual thrust of the story, which is the truth will set you free. Mm-hmm. And I said, I got to put a more comprehensive structure to the book. So the working title, you have a working title until it's published, is Dead Men Still Walk, and the fire still burns. And the spiritual fire in me is the passion, the conviction. This is wrong. I'm a witness. I got to tell the story. So now my challenge is how to bring readers into this story where they don't go at the beginning, oh, yeah, they all say they're innocent. How to take them into the case and actually show that an actually innocent person could be condemned to death. The appeals court's up and he's still on death row after 30 years. How can that happen?
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. I'm very eager to read it.
All I got to do is write it.
And would it make for a good movie or opera?
You write a good book and you put it out there. But what makes for good movies, what makes for good operas is a true human story where you have the heart of the conflict in it. Mm-hmm. Does it really help victims' families to wait 15 or 17 years and watch as the state kills the one who killed their loved one and they get to watch that violence and that's supposed to heal them? Is that true? On the one hand, the victim suffering, and on the other hand, what to do about the people who've done these murders. So you got to have that torque, that tension in it. So I got to find how to do that in this book, but it's discovery when you write. Any writers out there know, here's what I want to do, and then you get started on it, then suddenly it just starts unfolding for you. On your good days, on the other days, it's like a boat. You got to sail, and there's no wind, and you got to just row and row and row.
Yeah, or sometimes, in my case, you have a whole outline, and then you start writing, and the outline goes out the window.
Yeah, really.
And you just have to improvise with what you got.
Yeah. Tim Robbins was saying that last night about doing a film. He said you have a script, and it's a map, and then you start doing it. The actors get their insight in there, and it keeps unfolding on you as you go.
Well, Sister Helen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's been an honor to talk with you and just to work with you over the last several weeks, months that we've been doing Dead Man at the Met. We hope you can come back.
Yep. And for a chance.
Huh?
I'll be looking for a chance. I just want to say to all the young people out there, you know, find your passion, find your dream, find what lights a deep fire inside you, and then set out to do it. And resources are going to make their way to you, but you got to be steadfast in it.
Great. Well, I have no better sign off than that. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of our students and educators across the country, part of HD Live in Schools, for joining us. And we'll see you for the next book club. Thanks.
Thanks. Love to all the teachers out there. Bye.